Hey everybody, welcome to the newest episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. Today's guest joins me from Montreal, Canada. She's an alternative rock singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer who put out a new album called Motherhood back in August of 2020. Before we get the interview started, please make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And on that note, please welcome No Joy. Awesome. Well, thank you, No Joy, for joining me on an episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. You released an album, Motherhood, in August 21st, 2020. It's an awesome album, and everybody who's listening needs to go check it out. It's very shoegaze-y and electronic, and you blend so many elements into it. It's such a wild ride of an album. My first question is, why did it take 5 years to get a new No Joy album? The last one you put out was in 2015.
After 2015, I kind of wanted to. We were doing a lot of touring and a lot of. It was just this thing where you like put out a record, then you tour forever, then you write the next one, you put it out, you tour forever, and we had been touring for so much time that I wanted to take a step back and kind of understand the music industry more and get an idea of like what was next, because I kind of felt like we had done everything we could do as a full band. So then in the 5 years, kind of just did EPs very differently, trying to learn like different ways of recording, different ways of writing. So some of those we recorded remotely, some we recorded together in a different studio. And then one I did with Pete Kimber, who's Sonic Boom, that we did like very differently with, So I was just trying to like experiment and see which process I would want to use if I was going to do a full length. And that's why it took 5 years. Trying to learn.
That's a great reason to take some time off. So what did you learn? What were some really key pieces of information that hit you within those 5 years that allowed you to push this album out?
I learned that I like to write songs and then sit with them for a while before recording them. Like let them simmer, sit with them for a while, sit with the demos, see if you really like them. Because it's easy to get excited about something in the studio and then you take it back and you're like, that sucked. We were just having fun and it sounded cool at the time, but it actually sucked. So with these songs, George Albrecht and I wrote them, some were demos from, 5 years ago that I had just sitting around. And then we kind of sat down with the ones that we really liked, started fleshing them out, and then waited, 6 or 7 months before we got to the studio. So we really knew those were the ones that we wanted to record. So I think that's probably the most important thing I learned was just like take your time and be committed to the song. Don't just like track everything. Demoing everything is fine, but going in and really putting something like a full length together, you want to make sure that you're in love with like every element of it.
Right. I saw that you started the recording process, or at least the writing process, for this over 2 years ago. So that's kind of cool that it just makes sense that you say that. Were there any songs that maybe gave you more trouble, or like I've had this conversation with people where, you start a song and you feel really good about it, but the longer you can have it, it's almost like you might lose that spark the more you keep trying to work on it. So were there any songs that were like that for you? And if so, how did you kind of work around that?
Yeah, I think that's something I've experienced throughout recording, and that there's sometimes your original demo has the magic, and then when you try and re-record it or flesh it out, it's just you never capture that whatever it is in your first demo. So I've learned to stop fighting against that and just include your demo. Like on Motherhood, some of the vocals, a lot of the sounds are from the demo, because it was like, the first take I did on vocals was the best one. Even though I spent days and days and days trying to perfect it, it was actually the demo one that was better than all the other ones. So, and it keeps that sort of magic. I don't know why. I've done that before, where you try and re-record a song that the demo version you really like, but then the final product is like you kind of prefer the demo to the studio recording. So now I try and bring the demo into the studio.
Very smart. Yeah, that could be so frustrating to feel like you're so stoked about this song, and then you're like, well, it's got some some good parts to it, but I do need to re-record it. And then you start the re-recording process and you're like, I'm not even close to as excited as I was, you know. So that's really cool you got to do that. And it's also really cool that you got to work on this album a little bit with your sister,
Yeah.
Alyssa, who
Yeah.
provided some background screaming vocals for the second track. How was that experience working with her?
It was great. I mean, we never worked together before, which was so silly. We'd sometimes like run into each other if we were in the same city on tour, but we've never performed together with our current. I mean, we've done like shows when we were kids, like for our parents and stuff, but we've never like played our music together. And it just happened that when we were recording, she was off cycle with her band, so she was in Montreal at home. So I was like, okay, well, we got to get you on this track, and then because of COVID, her travel plans were delayed, so she was actually in town where I was. So we are like, okay, we'll do a video together. So it just kind of worked out timing, and was great. She's such a pro. It's like recording vocals for me literally takes like months and months and months, and I'm just like, ah. And she's just like one take, such a pro, pitch perfect, amazing. So it was really fun watching her like do her thing and her scream.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That scream, like especially after the first song, like
Yeah.
you have this, I wouldn't call it mellow song, but you're on a wave, you know what I mean? You're riding a wave. And then that second one comes in and she just starts like screaming, and it's totally it just like lifts you up. You're like, okay, here we go. Whose idea was that to do the scream? Was it always gonna be a scream, or were you
Yeah.
asking for like, you know, singing type vocals?
Yeah, yeah. She sings also, but it's so buried. It's kind of in the mix of things, so it sounds sort of like just, I don't know, like a synth or something, because it's really buried. But I always wanted her to scream on something. It just felt like I don't know. This was like our most metal song, so it kind of felt like it made sense.
Yeah, it does. And I saw that on a Facebook post, you had answered somebody's question saying that Four was your favorite song from the album. Is that still true? And if so, what about it makes it your favorite?
I mean, they're all my favorite, obviously. I love them all in different ways. Four was just a song that was like, this record was a big change and like trying new stuff and pushing myself. And that song, when we were writing it, like it, if you heard the original demo, it like does not sound the same at all. There's parts of it, like the piano, that's still the same. But George and we really took it and we're like, let's do it. And it was one of those moments where I don't really remember what happened, but then all of a sudden there was like baby sounds and DJ scratches, and we're like, yep, okay. It was just a very free creative moment that I felt like paid off, and the final version is like as cool as it was sounding in my head. So
Yeah, I think that seems to be a pretty general consensus from artists, that their favorite song is either A, tied in with their experience of actually writing and recording it, or B, it's because it turned out very close to how they had it in their head. That's something that maybe not most people think about or understand, is like you have this idea in your head, this perfect vision of what it should be, and the work is like really, taking that and making it a reality. Most times you change up a lot of things. Like it doesn't end up the way you imagined it, and that can be good, or it can be like frustrating because you really wanted to hit that mark. But that's cool for you that the first, or your favorite song, is the one that kind of hit that mark like spot on.
yeah, it was also the one that I was the most like, this is either gonna go really good or really bad. Like I don't know, but let's try it, and then it worked. So yeah.
It definitely paid off. It has like this 90s trip hop groove, but there's so much of a build up going into it. You're like, what the fuck is about to happen? And then it finally drops and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, we're riding the wave now.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask you about touring with Baths, because my friend and previous On That Note guest, Bobby Rethwish, is a huge fan, and he'd be really mad at me if he found out that I had a guest who toured with Baths and I didn't ask
Yeah.
about it. So how was that experience? And was there anything you learned on that tour?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that tour came back into like conversation because it was part of a very popular meme last week. The Bernie Sanders at the merch table
Yes, I wanted to
is
ask you about
actually
that too.
is from the Baths tour. They just like swapped Will out and put Bernie in. um, so Will's been a very, very dear friend of mine for a long time, and it was like just something we always wanted to play together, and the timing just happened then. Just the sweetest and most talented and charismatic person. Like I don't know. I've never seen him have like in a bad mood. He's just the most positive, great person, and just such a virtuoso with sound that it made me feel kind of like, whoa. I was learning a lot every day just watching him and Mo just like do their thing. It was incredible. So it's always nice to go on tour with a pal, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Going on tour with somebody who's actually a genuine friend, and he has such a way with soundscapes and just creating textures. Do you have anyone that you look up to when it comes to creating a sonic landscape?
Um, I think it comes from different places. I would say probably the two that are consistent forever are Nine Inch Nails,
Oh
which
yeah, I
are
see
yeah,
that.
they're forever one of my favorites because they just have this ability to compose songs that are like heavy and soft at the same time and sad and happy at the same time, or like they have these conflicting moments that are something that it builds tension, and it's something that I really look for in songs. And then I would say Boards of Canada for sure are one that I just
Mm.
feel like create these emotional soundscapes that you're just like, how the hell are they doing this? And I've listened to both those artists like on a loop consistently since I was a kid, probably a teenager. So I think those would probably be the two that I go back to the most.
Very cool. I used to listen to Nine Inch Nails constantly my senior year of high school. That's when I discovered the downward spiral, and that was it for me. I mean, it was a downward spiral, and I just
Oh
got
no.
like all into Trent's stuff. A good downward spiral.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Boards of Canada, though, that is a really interesting choice. I've listened to them here and there, and it wasn't until maybe not even a month ago that I kind of felt like I was in this electronic phase in a way. And I was like, maybe I should go back to Boards of Canada, their album, Music Has the Right to Children.
Yeah. Oh
I
my
was
god.
like, this shit is fire. Like, the production is ridiculous, but
It's ridiculous.
it was hard for me at first, I think, to get into that kind of world because it takes a little bit of maturity to just like sit down and really appreciate all the little things that are going on, because it's not like
Yeah.
there's lead vocal melodies or anything.
Yeah. I think those artists are like I'm a big fan of like headphone music. Like I like to hear the little things and be like, what instrument is that, or how did they do that, or what did they? And I mean, Boards of Canada, I have no idea who they are. I don't even know what they're doing, and it's like always so like what? There's no like live videos where you can pick it apart and be like, oh, they did that, they did that. Um, and same for Nine Inch Nails too. And it's like you're watching, especially like I would say even later, Nin, where you've got like Alessandro Cortini and Atticus Ross, and you're just like, what are they doing? Because they're just building these soundscapes around like a traditional rock band setup, and it's just like, it's great.
It's overwhelming in a good way.
Yeah, in a good way.
So last little thing I want to talk about before we move on to the last five is Joyful Noise, which is the record label that you are signed to. I've talked with a good amount of artists on this show. Some are with labels and some are not. So I always like to pick the brains of people who are on labels to ask, what do you like about being on a label? What do you not like? How do you enjoy being with the label you're with? And for people who are looking to be with a label or are in talks with being with a label, what kind of advice would you give them to like look out for when it comes to that stuff?
I think I made music before No Joy, and I didn't have labels, and then I did have labels, and then even in this 5-year break between More Faithful and Motherhood, I put out music on all different labels big, small, whatever. I think the thing I would recommend to anyone is to just do it yourself. Like, just know what you're doing, because then you'll know if you need a label, because you don't always really need a label. It's not the 80s where you're going to get like, $2 million advance to like do your record. Like, music industry is always changing. It's hard to kind of understand what's going on. I don't even understand what's going on most of the time. But I think in my experience with recording and with touring, like, taking control of stuff and learning and asking questions always helped me better understand what I really needed. If I needed a label, if I needed a booking agent, if I needed these things. So Joyful Noise it's really so funny, but the Jess, who's the A&R at Joyful Noise, I've known her for probably a decade. She booked my band at South by in like 2011. So our paths had like always kind of crossed. And then for the Sonic Boom EP, it was kind of like a more experimental record that I wasn't really sure where it should go in the world, because it was like an experiment, So Joyful Noise are really open-minded. They love all kinds of music. They love, it's not really genre specific. It's really open and kind of artist run almost. So then I linked back up with Jess for that record, and then we kept chatting till it was time for this one.
Great advice about doing it yourself, because I know a lot of people who would think, you sign with a label and all of a sudden you're going to be shooting to the stars. And that's just not really the case, especially not anymore. And more there are artists who are getting huge from not having a label. Like a few years ago, Chance the Rapper won a Grammy for his album and had no label that he released it on. So it just seems like we're seeing more and more that you can do almost everything by yourself. But that's good to think about a label in a way as, what can they do that I can't do? Maybe you're not as good about marketing and advertising, and that kind of help is important.
For sure. Yeah. It's always, once you know what the sort of like environment of the music industry is, you can sort of, and how you fit in it, you can sort of find where you do need help. And then there's always things like, marketing, digital marketing. There are ways to do it yourself too. You don't necessarily need a label. In some ways it might be detrimental, and you'll be making less money than putting it up on Bandcamp. So it's kind of, each artist has to sort of see what's best for them, and not necessarily think that like, it's, because there's this weird gatekeepy thing where like it's hard to get to a label. So once you do get there, you're like, I got to take this opportunity. But I actually don't think not every artist is the same. So some artists don't need a label and some do. And it's about figuring out what kind of artist you are and just making the right decisions.
Exactly. Great advice. Well, that's going to transition us over to the last 5, where I'll just ask you 5 quick questions and then we'll be done.
Cool.
All right. Number 1 is in the studio or playing live?
Oh, so hard, because I'm currently in the studio, which I love. Oh, so different. So different. I can't compare. I haven't played live really in a long time because there's no touring right now. So I'm going to say playing live, just because it's something I miss and would normally have done a lot of, but haven't yet. So
I enjoy asking that one because it's pretty 50-50. Like everybody like has a great answer for either or. And some people just have to say both. They're like, I can't pick.
I mean, I'll probably say both then. If I can say both, I'll say both.
There you go. Yeah. I love the studio because you get to kind of create something that doesn't exist yet, as opposed to a tour where you do get that energy and that feedback that you've been wanting for a long time that you don't get in the studio. But something about that exploratory phase of creation is something I really enjoy about the studio.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
So question number 2 is, what is a perfect album front to back?
Ooh, like an example or like what it is?
Like for you, like what is like to you a perfect album front to back?
A perfect album is one that like, like you're driving your car, you're listening to the album, you're like, this is so good. Oh, I'm almost home. I'm going to like drive a little further away just so I can finish the record and then come home. That's like a perfect album where you're just like, I need to hear the whole thing again and again.
Interesting. So far, you're the only one who's actually described what makes a perfect album, as opposed to giving examples of like actual albums that you think are perfect?
There's so many. There's so many.
Could you name one or two from, just off the top of your head that you would say are very influential to you and that you think are perfect?
Wow. Oh my God, there's so many. I don't even know where I would start. A perfect album. Jeez. I don't know. I don't even know where I would start on it. There's so many. It's like I can just remember. I can't picture the albums because there are so many going in my head, but I just remember moments like going for a walk and then the record only being halfway done, so like walking around a bit more so I could finish the album, or driving a bit more. But there's just too many. There's too many.
Well, hey, I'm not going to press you on it because that's a pretty great answer. Nobody's given an answer like that yet, so let's leave it there. I like it.
Okay.
Question number 3 is, who's a dream artist or producer to work with?
Oh, George Albrecht, hands down. I work with him, and I cannot say that anyone else has like influenced me in terms of production or taught me as much in production and mixing and arrangement and writing as much as George. He's like a sonic.
Wow. That's a great answer. George Albrecht, that's his name?
Yes.
Cool.
He did Motherhood with me, and then he's done More Faithful and Way to Pleasure and records in between, and has his own music. And it's just, he's the one person that when I say like, can we make it sound like more fluffy and pink? He'll be like, okay, you mean this? And like, he gets it. We really work well together. So he's my number one.
That chemistry is so important. I've talked with a few people that literally say the exact same thing of like, I want this to sound like little bubbles going on. And the other one's like, I got you, like no problem. Exactly. That's so cool to be able to have somebody translate that kind of energy into a reality.
Yeah. I think it happens when you're like, I'm not the most tech savvy mixer or arranger. I can do it, but like he's so good at the songwriting and the creation and the tech side that it just is it's a perfect balance.
Awesome. George Albrecht. Everyone's got to go check him out.
Go listen. It's so good.
What's it called?
He has a ton of music. He's got his own record that came out under his name, George Albrecht. But he releases all kinds of music because he's so prolific. He has like a metal band called Coral Cross. Then he's got like his like hard new wave stuff. And then he has Violins, which was his like, I guess, shoegaze band from maybe a decade ago. And then Lansing Dryden, which is like his, masterpiece records from the early 2000s. So there's a lot to dig into, but it's all different kinds of music, and really just goes to show like how versatile he is with sound.
I'll have to do a deep dive, and maybe you can send me a link or two to his stuff after the interview.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, number 4 is, what's on your musical rotation right now?
Right now, I mean, honestly, I've just been listening to the stuff that I'm tracking on a loop. Yeah. Which I can't say. So that's all I've been listening to, because I don't really like to, when I'm recording something or creating something, I don't like to listen to other things that might inform my creative decision. So I subconsciously copy something, So I haven't been listening to much. So much. I've been listening to like hockey games on the radio.
Interesting.
But right now I've been kind of just trying to focus on recording this. Before this, there was lots of stuff I was listening to. The Helena DeLand record that came out, I really loved that a lot. There's the Shamir record that came out this year. I listened to that on a loop. So there's been a ton of stuff. But whenever I'm in the studio like trying to create new stuff, I want to try and stay away from accidentally like having a hook in my head because I listened to the song 3 days ago and then coming in the studio and pretending it's mine. So try and go in with like a clean, no idea brain.
I feel like even if I try to do that, it would be hard for me to. But I kind of get that. Like once you have a song that you're working on, that kind of becomes your obsession, and just the idea of wanting to listen to anything else kind of just dissipates.
Yeah. I end up listening to it like when I'm tracking it, then when I leave, if I go for a walk, if I drive around in the car, different headphones, playing on big speakers, little speakers. So I try and listen so many ways that it gets like the songs on Motherhood I've heard like probably more times than any other song in the world.
Right.
Because I listen to them so many times. And I just get kind of like obsessive when I'm doing something. So
Gotcha. Well, great answer. Final question here before we leave is what is the next piece of equipment on your wish list?
that's a good question. I was looking into different vocal microphones. Because of so much home recording that's happening now, I wanted to have like some variety in that. So definitely been looking into that. Looking into looking into like a bass guitar, because I have a really bad bass guitar and I have a baritone guitar. But I was like, what if I get like a sick bass? For no reason, because it's like I don't even need it. But I was just looking on like, the deep dives when you're like, ooh, I'm going to look online for like stuff I can't afford to buy right
Yeah,
now. But,
of course.
But I was looking at like the Ibanez like 8-string basses, being like, this could be kind of sick. I don't know.
Getting an 8-string bass, you're really going into it.
Just going deep dive.
Cool. Well, maybe an 8-string bass is in No Joy's future here.
I hope so.
Or a vocal
We'll see.
microphone.
Yeah. One is way more practical than the other, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
Well, who wants practical? Nobody wants practical.
Exactly.
That's why I've spent hundreds of dollars on guitar pedals.
Exactly. Oh my God. I know.
That's a rabbit hole you can really go down.
Oh, and I have.
I feel like everyone's been there at one point, and if you haven't, it's coming up.
And I'm like borderline going into my modular synth phase, which I think is right after the guitar pedal. You just kind of like move. You get a little older, you go into the modular synth. So I've toyed a little bit in it, and I'm not good at it at all. But it's like it's there. Like that might be the next expensive journey I go on.
Yeah, it's certainly expensive, and it seems very complicated.
Super complicated, and like not something I'm good at. But maybe if we're locked down for another year,
yeah, that's right.
That's what I'll get into.
You can just tinker around with your modular synths for a whole year.
It might happen.
It just might. Cool. Well, No Joy, thank you for joining me for an episode of On That Note. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about your creative process behind your album Motherhood. Everybody needs to go listen to it. It's awesome. Such a crazy journey of shoegaze and some metal and electronic dance music. It's awesome.
Yeah, gotta get the 8-string bass so you could play these songs live.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing that live for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you again for coming on and joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome. No Joy. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you again for joining me for another episode of On That Note with Parker Whirling. If you haven't yet, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, and you can even leave a comment down below to let me know who you're listening to. On that note, I'll see you guys next time.